So I've rendered it out, and I've got this, which, considering how low res it is, I mean, at the beginning it's a little bit sort of blibby, but here it's looking really good, I think, considering. And that took an hour and 40 minutes to sim and about 3.5 hours to render. So that's pretty quick, especially for the sim part. I mean, it's really quick. So sort of go and look at the graph on final time. A couple of things I realised happened once I rendered it. I'd actually forgotten to turn on the resolution bound, so this is completely it hasn't got any sort of half resolution at the back or anything like that to try and optimize it. So this is just full res. So we can see down here, I'd actually forgotten to turn this on, so that was off. I might pause because it's going to have a bit of delay if I start fiddling around with the settings. And also the other thing I realised I'd changed was that I changed the speed to rate. And I think this is probably why I'm getting this sort of slow beginning, this sort of blub sort of beginning, because it's adding the speed as a rate over the top, so it's sort of adding it into it over time. So you're not getting that instant sort of this is the speed, it's sort of adding it onto it. I'm not still 100% sure how where has it gone? How these modes that we get actually work. I mean, when you read the parameters here, it says how whatever the attribute is emitted into the voxels. Sets a source of a property, so that's like defines it, but rate blends it and adds the source, the time dependent rate, into the property. So does that sort of define that the voxel to begin with always starts off with 0 and then this is added onto it over time, or does it have a property that I'm not quite sure what it is? What is the initial speed of the source air? Is it 0? And then these will change and add to it. So I'm not 100% sure how they work. So what I did was, because I'd sort of meant to do all this sort of adaptivity stuff, I re-simmed it out with the resolution bounds on, and I got a couple of problems straight away. So this was the first time I started simming it, and I realised that this back bit here, you could really see the low resness of the back part of the sim. So I moved the resolution boxes backwards a bit, so it was, you're not sort of splitting it in half, it was further back down. Then I simmed that out and I realised I got this problem. For some reason, this front part of the simulation was really low res, and you can see it more from the side actually here. I've actually gone into Photoshop to sort of show, I think, what's happened. So that's the high res resolution box I had, and this bit here at the front is outside of that, and you can see it at the back here. And that was where my low resolution box is at the back, but seemingly must be that if this area is defined as the high res area, everything else will be defined as whatever this low res area is, I'm guessing so far. So sort of more like that almost. So that was a thing to take into consideration, that if this isn't covering all of it, I thought that when I read the sort of info that the high resolution area you sort of defined, but these low resolution areas if they weren't in the low resolution area, then it would give it the high resolution, but it obviously doesn't. It gives it the low, I think. Not 100% sure what's going on here, but that's what happened. So which one is that one? I basically, extended that one out to like that. And you can see here, this is where I had with my first resolution box, I'd had this sort of here-ish halfway through, and that's where we're seeing in that first sim this really low res background bit here. So I went through and I did that, and I changed those. So I made it look like this, and then I re-simmed it out. I also changed the rate. Where are we? I changed the rate, the speed mode back to rate. Where are we there? Yep, so I changed that back to rate. No, I changed it back to set actually, sorry. So that first one, this one here, this is speed set at rate, no resolution bounds. So then I simmed it out again. I got this, and because I changed the rate to set on the speed, I got a completely different sort of looking sim actually. So you can see it comes up a lot quicker. It hasn't got that sort of blur there. It just happens. A couple of the other things that happened as well, because this sim is sort of bigger, it's wider. It actually turned out to be a bigger cache. And at these frames here at the end, it didn't render the fluid. This has got something to do with the file sizes were over 4 gig, and there is some sort of issue I think at the moment with 4 gig files. I think they're supposed to be fixed, I think, if you're using the latest version of Arnold, which I am, but it's still happening. It's rendering some of them at over 4 gig, and then these ones don't render. So that's something to be aware of as well. So with that said, let's just go back and have a quick look at the graph. So we've got our emitter that's coming in, and then I'm varying the different source properties. So speed direction, we decided on 3 in the X, 1 in the Y, and 3 in the Z. And then we did -3, 0.5 and -3 in our lowest value. So that's our max, that's our min. And we were applying that to the initial speed direction. Then we had our initial speed, we had a variance of 6 to 12, and both of these were non-biased, so it was an even spread between the two numbers. And my temperature was 300 to 1000, same even spread. Then that went into our source air. Resolution here was 1.1. All these numbers are ignored now because we're getting the temperature from here. Made sure my mode was set for that second time I rendered it or simulated it. And then we've got fuel. I left the ignition as the default, 0.9, 0.14 in the burn rate. And then that piped into our aero, into the sources. Our colliders with the floor, we just made sure that we set that resolution mode to absolute rather than relative. And the geo mode I put to shell because it was a plane, solid for sort of closed meshes like cubes and things. Left all the collider properties as they were. Then we had a vorticity influence, which I set to 2, and I modulated that. Let's change the color of this. So these bounding boxes, you can change the colors if you, let's make it darker, like that. You have the modulate influence. I modulated the vorticity using the temperature, and I said anything below 300 temperature wise didn't get any vorticity, and anything above 800 got the full 2, and then it falling ratio between the two as it goes down. We pipe that into influences, and then in our settings we had the big change was making this fluffy. I left everything as its defaults there. The scene units were a meter. Simulation speed can be quite handy. If it's going a bit slow, you can speed it up, or if it's going too fast, you can slow it down. That's a global setting. We didn't really look at anything here, so I didn't do much there. That's an accuracy thing, so if you're getting stepping in your simulation, you can crank these numbers up. So it calculates the simulation multiple times between frames. And then we've got our adaptivity, which we didn't use any of this because not 100% sure it's working properly yet. And I'd forgotten to turn that on the first time, and I did it the second. And these pipe into settings and adaptivity. The aero volume comes out, and we put it into the cache, and we set our file project name, and then we cache that out. And then we pipe that through and assign material so we can apply our standard volume. And let's just create a background for that. Give it a color. And just we can type in here as well, shader. And then finally that just pipes through to our output. So that was the whole sort of network. Let me just unpause this now. Might think about it. That's it. My last thing I want to say, I'm just going to take this up to sort of frame 90. Might take a while to sort of load this up, so I might pause. So I've loaded up this frame 90, and this is frame 90 in my render. I probably could have had my sun a bit lower actually, because this is all in shadow. It's quite dark. But what's one of the other really good aspects of what's going on in Bifrost now is this sort of the fact that the viewport render is very close to what you finally render out, and that's brilliant. I mean, the sort of feedback you get here is so close to this that you can really, you can rely on what you see here, which is really good. If you ever use Maya fluids, often what you saw in the viewport to what you rendered look completely different. And just the last point about the speed of all this simming in an hour and 40 minutes, and the sort of detail you get even at these low reses. I do think what's going on with the Aero solver in Bifrost is really brilliant. So I hope this has helped anyone who wants to get started making explosions. And good luck. Cheers.